So are you tired of feeling lost when it comes to your money? Budgeting doesn't have to be a headache. So today we're going to be making it simple, breaking down the basics so you can finally take control of your cash flow and start building the future that you deserve without all of the overwhelm. Now, whether you've tried budgeting before and it didn't work or you've been avoiding it because it seems complicated, don't worry. By the end of this episode today, guys, you'll have a clear, beginner-friendly path to setting up a budget that works for you. And we'll be sharing some key tips to make the whole process easier and more effective. Stay tuned. Hey guys, welcome to today's show. I am Brad Nelson, founder of Debt Free Dad. I paid off about $45,000 in debt, have been debt free now for more than 11 years outside of my mortgage. I've also been fortunate to help thousands of other people save and pay off tens of millions of dollars with the work that we do here at Debt Free Dad.
And I'm Amber Taylor, and we saved and paid off over $54,000 in just 20 months. And we've been living debt-free outside of our mortgage since 2018.
And my name is Chris Hawkins, and my wife and I from 2005 to 2008 paid off just under $100,000 worth of debt and have been debt-free except for our mortgage ever since.
I'm Ryan Nelson. My wife and I paid off $160,000 in debt while raising 3 kids.
Now, after listening to this episode, you guys, if you want to take this a step further and you'd like to get better results with your finances in as little as 30 to 60 days, we'll be sharing some details about how you can get started with that later on in today's show. So, guys, today we're talking about the big, bad B word, the budget. You know, every time I think about that word, I for some reason always think of, especially when you first get started with it or how people feel about it, it's like the Jaws music, right? Like, I have to take control of my finances, and you know it's coming. Like the shark is coming into the water and it's going to get you. And that shark is the budget for a lot of people. For a lot of households, it can almost feel like a swear word or a cuss word. Any thoughts for you guys when you guys first started with this and how budgeting was such a complicated thing?
I'm the oddball. I like spreadsheets.
The nerd of the group.
Yeah, it gives me control. I love this control.
Yeah, for me, pen and paper was ultimately the best way to get started. I have since switched over to spreadsheets, but part of that's because once you get completely out of debt, there's a lot of things in your budget that don't go in there anymore. You can actually simplify things. To me, writing it down on paper, that physical activity of writing it down, ultimately is what helped me a lot to begin with.
Yeah, I hated it when we started.
I didn't hate doing it as much as I hated following.
Right.
Well, I think that yeah, that's probably more realistic. It's just especially when you start, it's hard to get yourself to follow it because you're used to the living in the moment lifestyle. And I think that was the hardest part. Once we started it and we're sticking to it, then it gets easy. But that beginning stage, yeah, it is hard. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, it's just so easy. Once you write it, it's so perfect. It takes some getting used to.
Yeah. I think the hardest part for us was just getting on the same page because I was just like, I was strict. I was like, this is what we're doing and this is how we're going to do it. And we're not spending any more money anywhere. Now my husband's just like, no.
So you were the hammer when it came to it.
Oh yeah.
So was I.
Yeah.
For us, like the biggest thing that helped us when starting a budget was we also used kind of like the envelopes or cash stuffing as part of our budget. So like for clothes and car repairs, things like that. One of the biggest thing that helped us be successful in the long term was, I think it was a tax return. We got like a windfall of money, a few $1,000s. And what we did with that is instead of like paying off debt or, doing stuff, we had already had our emergency savings, is we took that and we kind of funded like months ahead for all of those things. Because like, it's easy to say like, hey, we're only going to spend $100 a month for kids' clothes. Well, when our kids were younger, I mean, I'd buy them a size 5 shoe and 2 weeks later they're in a size 7. Yeah. I mean, it was like it's hard to sometimes keep up. So we've kind of funded things ahead. And once we did that, it kind of set the stage for then you're just adding to that. And yes, you're spending out of it. But when we didn't do that at first, it just was, we felt like we were always spending what we saved like the previous week. Like, oh, we got to buy this for a kid's school project. We just put that in there, so it's like we're never getting ahead. But when we funded ahead, then it was like we never really ran out at that point.
Yeah, and I would agree. The envelopes is probably the best kept secret to help you get out of debt, but more importantly, stay on a budget. And we still go back to envelopes from time to time when we feel necessary. And to be honest with you, I'm to the point now where I'm sort of thinking about going and getting some cash out of the bank and putting them in envelopes just to sort of rein in, to control myself, as Amber talked about the word control. Sometimes you can lose control, and I want to regain it. The other thing I would say, the only bad budget is the one that you don't do. All right, Amber talked about, she started with spreadsheets. I talked about doing pen and paper. There's no wrong way to do a budget other than to not do one.
I want to piggyback on what you just said, Chris. It's the one you don't do. According to Gallup, 32% of households have a working budget. That means that in their research, the majority of people, right, 68% don't have a budget. In fact, we just read some statistics on a podcast about 8 steps to reduce financial stress. You can probably find that in our podcast list. But one of the statistics that we shared in there in a recent study that they just did a few months ago is 58% of people admit to the bad habit of not keeping a detailed budget. And these same people are the ones that are saying financial stress is wreaking havoc in their lives. So I think that's the thing you got to understand, is that a budget is like the cornerstone to reaching your financial goals. Yes, behaviors, habits, and choices, and mindset, and all that stuff is going to play a huge role too. But you're not going to reach your goals if you don't have a budget. You just gotta do it, right? It's like understanding that it's going to suck and still doing it anyways, because you just have to commit to it and say, like, we're going to learn how to do that. And also, guys, it's a learned habit too. You know, it's something you're going to learn how to do over time. You're not going to be great at it right away. It might, in fact, I tell people, like, plan on like some learning curves for the next 6 to 12 months, because you got to get through a whole calendar year to really work through everything. But the more you're committed to it, the better it will make your life. There's no question.
I just seen a post the other day, and I think it's interesting. And we talk about this because we always say, spend 15 minutes a day on your finances. But the post that I seen was, if you spend just 18 minutes a day on anything, just one thing, whatever it is, over a year, that's 100 hours. And if you put 100 hours into something over the year, you'll be better than 95% of the people out there that are doing it. And so it's like, this doesn't have to take 3-4 hours a day. I mean, if you just spent 15 minutes a day, you're talking over 90 hours over the course of a year focusing on your finances, you'll be better. I mean, I think we're all proof of that. When I started focusing on it and paying attention to it every day, I mean, you'll radically change your financial life over the course of a year.
Yeah. All right, guys. So let's talk about a few tips to get started. So the first one, we talk about it all the time. It's track your expenses. This is the first thing. So before you even sit down and write your budget out, you got to understand like what your expenses are so you can know what numbers to actually put on your budget. So go back and print out the last 3 to 6 months of your statements, 3 to 6 months of your expenses. So things like your bank statements, your credit card statements. If you're using digital wallets like PayPal, Venmo, Cash App, if you're even using cash, make sure you're starting to keep your receipts. But go through and figure out, like, what am I spending on transportation costs and gas and groceries and medication and kids' activities and all of the things that your money goes towards. First, you got to start there. And guys, I think this is, for me, this is probably one of the biggest mistakes that I made, is that I never went back and did this. And what I ended up doing was just creating a budget that was completely unrealistic. And then you get to the end of the month and you're like, well, that didn't work and I suck at this, right? And the reality is, well, I didn't even really know how much we were spending on certain categories because I never really went back and really looked.
Yeah, we went back and we looked, and for us, it gave us a pay raise because we realized where we were spending money was like, wow, we could really dial that down. And I know a lot of people are probably thinking like, yeah, no, that's not me. Listen, I thought we were living paycheck to paycheck. Like, I literally thought, like, we are struggling so bad. We're living paycheck to paycheck. We can't do this. How are we ever going to pay off debt? Because we don't have any extra money to put on debt. If we did, I'd be paying it off already. And really what happened was we dialed down some of the things that we were doing, and it was within that first 30 to 60 days we were like, boom, this is happening. Not necessarily going to happen with everybody, and I get that, but a lot of times it does actually give you a pay raise.
Yeah, and I think this is like the biggest thing. That's why it's why you should do it right on the front end, because I think this is the biggest excuse people give. I gave it as to why they don't want to do a budget. It's because, like, I don't have enough money. I don't have enough money to make, so it doesn't even make any sense to do it. Well, if you do this, I think all of us have probably done this, and it's just that feeling of like, I spent how much going out to eat? I spent how much? How many times did I go to Walmart? How many times did I go to Target? What did I even buy at Target that equaled up to that amount of money? Like, you just really start to realize, and again, this is something I would just suggest, really take your time and go through. Don't do it quick. Don't try to just print out a few statements. Like, really see where you're spending your money. Because I agree, Amber, I think most people, not everyone, but most people will be shocked. And I think, Brad, you said this before. We've never had people do this exercise, or very rarely have we had anybody do this that walked away and said, nope, I knew exactly where all my money was going.
Right. Never. It's always the opposite.
So a lot of times it's death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah.
Okay. And you don't realize where those small little expenses are going. That's what I think Ben Franklin said. Small leaks sink great ships.
Right.
Okay. It's the small things. And by doing a budget, it helps you become aware of those. I think Ryan is the point he's making there for those of you who maybe are not convinced. The other thing is the first few times, because I did a budget 3 different times and stopped, started again, stopped. And it was the third time finally that we sort of figured it out. When you do this, it's going to be 2 days into your budget and something's not going to get right.
Yeah.
Okay. The first time you do it, if you make it 2 days, you're lucky. And I'm telling you this out there just so you know that this is normal and to help you fight through it, to help you know that, okay, he told me this was going to happen. So 2 days into it, something didn't go right. And then 2 days later, something else didn't go right. And it seemed like the whole month, I'm like, good gracious, how did I screw this up so bad? But one thing I didn't do was really go back and track my expenses. Okay. I tried to sort of wing it. And it took me 3 months of doing this to start to really get a feel for where my money had been going. And so a big thing, you're right off the bat, go back through all of your bank statements. Write it down. One thing I would suggest you do is get a pad of sticky notes and write down a different expense on each sticky note. And what that will allow you to do is to later on come back and sort of stick them on a table and look at all of them. And then it might help you to then rearrange and move some things together to create some categories to maybe give you an idea of how to get started on a budget. But yeah, writing it down, being aware of where your money's going will help you not have 400 times it seemed like in the first month that I had to adjust my budget. Right. And but it's still going to happen. Even when you write things down, you're going to forget that the kids need this at school and you've got to write a check, or that you've got to pay that insurance bill that's every 3 months that you forgot about. I mean, because you've been looking at the last 2 months and you didn't see that car insurance bill, or those are examples. Things are going to happen, but eventually over time you have to stick with it. And the more that you stick with it, the better you're going to get at it, the better you're going to figure out how to do it for yourself. And eventually it's never going to be perfect, ever going to be perfect. But you're going to have a lot of confidence in it, and you'll start to see the benefits of it the more you do it.
Yeah, the other thing I want to mention too, guys, is when you first get started and you are writing that budget, like Chris just mentioned, if you use sticky notes or if you're writing these down in a notebook, and people might say, well, what do I prioritize? And let's talk about this this little phrase that we use inside Roots, which is our membership program. We call it Protect This House. Here's what I see a lot of people doing. I've done it before. So if you've done this, don't be ashamed, is that when you're living paycheck to paycheck and money's tight, I was a big credit score guy. Like Brian and I have talked about this. Our mom, that was probably the number one financial lesson that our mom told us, is you always have to have a good credit score. So I never wanted to be late on payments. So what that would mean sometimes, though, is that I would prioritize my credit card payments versus like a light bill sometimes. And I would get behind a little bit on the electric bill. Not terribly behind, but enough to be like, it's late, because I wanted to prioritize my my credit card and my credit score. So I see a lot of people doing this, and then they start getting behind on like their basic necessities. So things like their rent, they get behind on, again, their mortgage. They might get behind again on, the utility bills, or you might be shorting yourself on food. So you want to make sure you're prioritizing those things first. That's why we call it Protect This House. You got to protect your house first, because if you can protect that, it gives you legs to stand on the next day to figure it out. But if you are basically cutting off your legs financially and not taking care of your essentials, you're going to put yourself in a very dangerous place by prioritizing, say, like your credit card bills or things like that.
You're right. You have to listen. If you've got a roof over your head and you've got food in your stomach and you can stay warm at night and you've got the lights on and you've got water, And then, of course, the next two, put something to wear to get to work and a way to get to work. You can live to fight another day. Okay. The sun will come up tomorrow. And when the sun comes up tomorrow and you've got food in your stomach and a shelter over your head, it certainly makes life a lot more manageable.
I think as you're kind of thinking about the priorities, I think, so if you just list them out, it's, food, shelter. So food is just grocery bills. This isn't like,
Not Red Lobster.
Yeah.
Not Red
So like,
Lobster.
so when we think food, like this is a part where if we tell you to start on step one and we're like, hey, 3 to 6 months of expenses, and you see you're spending $800 a month going out to eat, don't do that anymore. So basic necessities is food, shelter, making sure your rent or mortgage, utilities, gas, electric, water, basic phone or cell service. So this might not be your $150 a month plan with unlimited data. You might need to scale that back. Basic clothing, and then transportation. And I think that's a big one because I know there's a lot of people out there with huge car payments. Those are things we want to get under control. But at the beginning, especially if you're relying on that car, like I used to have a car. I did like field service work. I had to travel all over. I needed that for work. So you can't like prioritize a credit card bill over making a car payment that literally is what's funding your paycheck every week. So make sure that you're covering those things first.
Yeah. And then obviously, don't forget about things like prescriptions and things like that too, because obviously you need those. Going back to the expenses, guys, I want to hit on that. Ryan, you're kind of talking a little bit about it when it came to like figuring out, like if I'm spending $800 on going out to eat, that's like, whoa, I'm spending way too much. But understanding what your expenses are, it does give you an opportunity to say, like, what are we going to keep? Like, what are we going to shop around? And what are we going to get rid of? And that sense of control will help alleviate a lot of stress in your life, because you're not gonna be in a situation where you no longer don't know like what's going on with your finances. You're gonna know exactly where you're at, what you're spending, and that gives you a starting point that most people just don't have. And I feel like that's why a lot of people deal with a lot of financial stress and anxiety, because I mean, they have everything everywhere and they don't really know what's going on with anything. So I think having that, 3 to 6 months of expenses, understand where your money's going, and now writing your first budget, it's really going to help with a lot of the stress that you might be dealing with.
It goes back to something Amber said, which is most people think, well, I don't have the extra money. And then all of a sudden you start realizing I've spent $800 eating out last month. Maybe I do have some extra money. So you're right. This is a necessary activity to go back and track your spending, because it's going to let you know where your money's going, but it also is going to give you some hope. All right. Because now you go, man, if I just cut out, half of my eating out, there's some hope. If I can cut out more than that, even better. So you don't necessarily do this to include it in your budget, but you do it to help you come up with a game plan to do a better budget, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and I think the other point I want to bring up too is that, we mentioned, like Chris, you mentioned, like in the first 2 days, something's going to come up and it's not going to be on your budget, right? This is one of the reasons why we are huge fans of first prioritizing building your emergency fund too. I think your emergency fund is like your best friend to your budget, because there's going to be things that are going to come up on there, I should say, that aren't planned, especially in the first 3 to 6 months of doing it, because you're not going to have it all figured out. So having that emergency fund in place really helps kind of shake hands again with your budget, because now you have something to dip into rather than saying, well, I guess we got to whip out the credit card again. So I think the key to successful budgeting is also having that small emergency fund started too.
Yeah, that little backup. I had to use it right away. My dog ate something he shouldn't have. And we were at the vet within the first 2 months, I think it was, maybe the first month. And I was like, oh my gosh, but had I not had that emergency fund, the budget probably wouldn't have worked for me.
And to piggyback on that, I'm sure at the moment you probably felt like this whole emergency thing was a waste of time.
Oh yeah, absolutely. What's this $1,000 to $2,000 going to do? Like, really? And I probably would have thrown in the towel had I not had it, to be honest with you. So I'm so grateful I had it.
So, and then the other big part of this, you guys, I think is to be successful with it, is the secret to all of it is the consistency part. And I think this is the part where we probably struggle the most when it comes to budgeting, is that what I have found with people after coaching thousands of people over the years is that we're really good at it for the first few months. But then a month goes by, we don't do it. The second month goes by, we don't do it. And we all of a sudden are back to square one and not having a budget again. So I think long-term wise is just having the consistency. And we've done actual full episodes here on this podcast about the topic of just being consistent. So if you're looking for some ideas, that just look that up in the titles, or you'll find it. All right. We talk about it often, but consistency is going to be key.
Staying consistent can be difficult when 2 days later something goes wrong. 2 more days, something later it goes wrong. And then the second month things go wrong. And the third month things go wrong. And there can be some level of, man, this is never going to work. Why am I doing this? And so it's the mistakes, and I think we're going to talk about that here in a minute, that go hand in hand with consistency. Recognize there's going to be mistakes. There are things you can do to improve and not make as many mistakes to help you stay consistent. But it does take fighting through things not working for a while before it really starts to click. And you've got to just keep trudging forward.
Yeah, and it's not going to work unless you work it either. You can't just write your budget on a piece of paper and throw it in a drawer and then look at it in 30 days because it's not going to work.
Yeah. Well, that's why we suggest in the, we call it the Roots 15. Part of your 15 minutes every day should be reviewing your budget. And it keeps your eye on the prize, essentially, and hopefully helps distract from all of the distractions that are happening around you throughout the day of trying to get you to spend money. Last thing I want to talk about, when new people get started, I think they sometimes feel like I've got to find the perfect tool to do my budget, like the app or a spreadsheet or a form, whatever it might be. I want to just warn people, successful budgeting doesn't happen with like a specific tool. That's not going to save you. You are the magic in the budget. Now, I think finding the right tool is important, but I think personally starting out, written budgets, I think I would prefer, or I would suggest you guys to do those versus, say, finding an app or like even a spreadsheet. Now, that's just me. I feel like for me, when I started actually writing it down, I felt more connected to it, so to speak, rather than just quickly kind of typing some of the stuff into an app or a spreadsheet.
Yeah, we did both. Like, we did write it down, and I think it helped my husband more because then we didn't have to be both trying to get into the spreadsheet. It just made it tangible on paper for us. Now it's more of a copy and paste, but when we were starting out, we were doing both. So
yeah, keep it simple is the most important thing. I'd rather you be oversimplified than overcomplicated. And I'll tell you a story real quick. When I was doing financial coaching, I had a couple who contacted me. Turned out they wanted me to referee between the husband and wife and who was on right, who was wrong. Okay. And the husband was the one doing the budget. He was a spreadsheet guy, and he was frustrated that his wife wouldn't look at the budget. Now, fortunately for them, they were debt-free except for their mortgage. They were doing all the right things, but he was frustrated that she wouldn't stick with the budget. So he sent it to me. I kid you not, this budget had to have 200 lines in it. Okay. There was him, his wife, and 2 kids. He had a line in there for his clothing, a line in there for her clothing, a line in there for kid number 1's clothing, a line in there for kid number 2's clothing. And I looked at it and I basically told them this was my recommendation. I'm like, dude, just simplify it.
Yeah.
Just put clothing in there. All right. Just put, don't put kid number 1 allowance, kid number 2 allowance, my spending money, her spending money. Simplify things. And she'll probably much more likely to look at it. So when you keep things simple, it's easier to stick with it. The thing I hate about spreadsheets is when you overcomplicate it, that's more things you got to go in and move numbers, type numbers, change numbers. And it becomes too much work. So the most important thing is don't overcomplicate it. Keep it simple, and it becomes easier to follow.
Well, and I just want to add, I think this first 6 to 12 months when you're doing a budget, you're really rewiring your brain of how you spend money and how you treat money. And I think that's why it's so hard and why people give up, why it's hard to stay consistent, because I think for a lot of us, and I was this way, you're in the live in the moment kind of person, right? We're at the store and I want to buy these clothes today. I'm at the store and I want to buy this cool thing at Best Buy today. I don't want to look at my budget and say, is it in my budget? Or have to think about this month, I want to buy this cool thing at Best Buy. So let's plan to put that in the budget. It's just not how we think. We think of we run around all day and we just go from things and we're like, hey, let's go out to eat today. Hey, let's go do this. Hey, let's go do that. And we don't really think about what are we trying to do. So I think you really have to give yourself some grace and some understanding that this first 6 to 12 months of doing a budget, it is going to be hard. It is not going to be fun. It is not going to be you're not going to be thinking of these things. And it is hard in those moments because you are going to be like, yeah, it's not in the budget. And it's hard to say, well, it's not in the budget. That means we don't buy it. Because there were times at the beginning where it was like, well, I don't care if it's not in the budget. We're still buying it. Because it's just a rewiring of how you think about and treat money. And I think when you start getting through that, it gets so much easier. It really does. Because a lot of people think a budget means you can't do any of those things. And it doesn't mean that. It just means you're kind of planning it ahead of time to do that. So you don't end up at the end of the month spending $800 on food, or $1,000 at a store that you weren't expecting, or $300 on clothes that you had no plan of really buying, but you were out shopping and thought it would be fun just to do it.
Yeah.
So just for me, from a budget standpoint, I think just understand when you're first starting, it's not like, even if you take all of our tips and you do your very first one, the very next day, either something happens or you're going to be out with your friends and they're going to be like, let's go here. And you're like, sure. Because you're just not thinking that way yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think my biggest tip though is like not to be super strict with yourself. And I think this is where I had to myself personally drop down on, because my husband was like, no, we're still gonna go and eat out, and we're still gonna do this.
Yep.
But I was super strict, and we were paying off our debt in like 12 months, 13 months, and I was like, we're gonna do this. And then as we started to go, I was like, this isn't fun. And I probably would have quit had I not added some fun into the budget. So don't think a budget has to be so crappy that it's going to be awful until you pay off your debt or whatever that goal is for you. Just know you can add the fun into the budget. Just plan for it.
Yeah, your budget does not have to be a whip or a punishment. It's, that's not what we're shooting for. And also, just understand that the way society looks at budgets is that you're cheap. I mean, just look at how they use the word budget. You're going on a budget vacation, or if you're shopping for something, they ask you if you're on a budget, which ultimately implies what? That you're not looking to spend a lot of money. And that's just that's just a misconception about it. If you have any sort of earned income and you have expenses, you need a budget. No matter how much income you have, no matter how big the expenses are, you need to have a budget. Also, guys, speaking of this wonderful budget and the form that we use here, you can actually get a free copy of this form if you head over to our website at debt-free-dad.com and you watch this video that's going to help you get better results with your finances in 30 to 60 days. We'll have the link in the show notes for this. You guys get the form and you can start working on your budget today. Thanks for joining us on today's show, and we will see you guys on the next episode.